Hello and welcome to the monthly Southwest Drought Briefing. I'm Emily Elias, Director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. These briefings emerged during the 2020 Southwest Drought from the Drought Monitoring and Reporting team of the Drought Learning Network. This network links climate service providers with resource managers and resource managers with one another to increase landscape and community resilience in current and future drought. These briefings will continue as long as there are areas of extreme and/or exceptional drought in the southwestern United States. I want to take a moment to thank my colleagues from NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, Joel Lisenby and Adam Lang. Joel will be moderating the questions at the end of the briefing, so please use the question feature and go to webinar at any time during the talks. We begin this webinar by respectfully acknowledging that the land each of us is joining from today is the ancestral land of Indigenous cultures. I believe it's important to provide this acknowledgement because the narratives of this land and region have long been told from one dominant perspective, without full acknowledgement of the people who lived on this land before us. Both of our speakers, Mike Crimmins and Ben McMahon, are joining from Tucson, Arizona today, home to the Ohodum and the Yaqui. Both Mike and Ben are with the Climate Assessment for the Southwest, a program that was established in 1998 as part of NOAA's Regional Integrated Science and Assessments Program. CLIMAS is housed at the Arizona Institutes for Resilience at the University of Arizona. Today, we'll hear first from Mike on drought and a monsoon update. And next, we'll hear from Ben on CLIMAS products and projects. Mike Crimmins is on the faculty of the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. Mike is an extension specialist in climate science for Arizona Cooperative Extension. He's been in this role for more than 15 years, working with ranchers, farmers, and natural resource managers across Arizona to integrate climate information in their planning and decision-making, and assisting them in developing strategies to adapt to a changing climate. Ben is a research faculty member located at Arizona Institutes for Resilience. His work includes leading existing and developing new climate services for CLIMAS, research on use and utility of climate data and information for decision-making and long-term planning, and the potential for innovative data science applications to enhance climate services, development, and stakeholder engagement in various decision contexts. Mike and Ben both produce the Southwest Climate Podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And I think of it as a fun and enlightened conversation about climate in the Southwest. The most recent one was just last week, where they talked about basking in the glory of the 2021 monsoon. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike for the drought and monsoon update.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Crimmins from the University of Arizona. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Joel, for having us today. And I'm going to do a quick overview of some of the conditions we've experienced down here in the Southwest, and try not to focus too much on Tucson, where I'm living, because we've been really enjoying the monsoon season, and try to kind of a little broader perspective. But we will zoom in on some of the really wet conditions that have emerged across, especially South Central Arizona and Southern New Mexico. So this is the US Drought Monitor map. I apologize, I couldn't get Colorado in on this particular map set. And we can pull that up later if we need to, but it's got kind of a similar conditions to Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. The Great Plains side of Colorado looks quite a bit better. But this map series right here is starting with June 1st and then running through last week's US Drought Monitor map. And just wanted to kind of illustrate where improvements have occurred and where they haven't. So we can look up through California, Nevada, Utah from June 1st to August 17th, not huge changes, some kind of improvements here and there, but the biggest improvements really have occurred across the southern part of Arizona and much of New Mexico, where we've seen a lot of that exceptional drought started to really shrink back, and Arizona has almost gotten exceptional drought out of most of the state. There's still a couple of pockets along the Colorado River Valley and up along the Utah-Arizona border, and then a little bit, some pockets in New Mexico as well. But We made some really good progress with monsoon precipitation in July and through the early part of August. Slowed down right now, but maybe there's a chance for that precip to come back in and we can continue to whittle away at these shorter term drought conditions. So really the biggest changes that we've seen, not much precip fell across Arizona, New Mexico in June. We can really center on July, and then once we get the updates through August, we'll really see these totals climb a little bit more. But just focusing on July, we can see here that a lot of Four Corners states actually saw, and even into Nevada and California, which are typically very dry in July, but Arizona and New Mexico seeing mostly above average precipitation with some kind of isolated areas across Arizona where we've had record wet conditions. So Tucson in particular had its record wettest July on record. And you can see that this is really a mirror image, well, the opposite of what we saw last July when the monsoon didn't show up and we ended up having record hot conditions. The temperatures were actually moderated quite a bit because of just socked in cloudy conditions for days on end and really keeping the solar radiation down. So July and August, July in particular, cooler than average conditions and wetter than average conditions here across Arizona and New Mexico. The monsoon precipitation, this is a map we pulled together at CLIMAS. This is using daily gridded precipitation data from Precip. So just taking that Precip data and totaling it from June 15th through August 22nd. So this is updated through yesterday. And this is gridded precipitation. So it's taking that station data every day and then regressing it against elevation and other station data. And we can see here that the accumulations across, really you can look for south central Arizona into southern Arizona and then across much of New Mexico as well. Really impressive totals, you know, above 10 inches, some locations seeing anywhere 14 to 18 inches of total precip when that official start date on June 15th through August 22nd. And we scale that against the percent of average precipitation. So this is the amount of precipitation you'd expect between June 15th and August 22nd. It's not the full seasonal total, it's just scaled to that date. Really some impressive percent of average deviations here, 200, 300, and 400% of average. So some locations have had 4 times what they normally see in this June 15th through August 22nd period, really centering in south central Arizona. We can take this map too, so that same map of percent of average on a daily basis, and then look at its extent. So we take this map and then you can kind of think about it along the y-axis as just categorically tallying up the percent of area across all of Arizona, New Mexico in these different categories. So we in June 15th through basically around the end of June, not much activity, and that's quite expected. We don't usually really pick up into, especially in Arizona, into the monsoon activity until the first week of July. But really quickly, by the end of June, we were already having pretty extensive rain events, which I'll show you across the Southwest, and mounting some impressive precipitation totals. The big 2 rallies or 2 bursts we've had this whole monsoon season have been about the 3rd week of July and then the 2nd week of August, which these were multi-day widespread heavy rain events that really boosted a lot of the totals across the region. And we can, just looking at the upper plot here is daily average dew point in Tucson. And so this is a single point metric here in Tucson of atmospheric moisture, but we can look across the much of the Southwest and see that we've been at elevated moisture amounts since late June. So we had the heat waves in the Southwest in mid-June, and right on the heels of that, we started to see that tropical moisture flow in up the Gulf of California and in from the Gulf of Mexico. And it's really kept much of the Southwest in solid, above average dew points and in the atmospheric humidity. We had 1 break in activity, and we saw this slow down where we dropped to just below average or below median dew points here in Tucson, and it really showed up across the whole region. So the daily extent of rainfall in this lower right plot here across Arizona would be just looking at a daily precip map and how much of the area of Arizona was it seeing any precipitation above 0.01 1/100th of an inch of precipitation. And so there those widespread extent active days were occurring all through July. That really quick break we saw with the dip in the dew points, and then we moved right back into an active period that 2nd week of August. And since we've started to see that moisture trail off, and we've been in another break period, but it looks like that we're going to be moving back into another active period in the next couple of weeks. So this is just basically kind of a film strip view of daily precipitation from that gridded. It's got Arizona, New Mexico in these little tiny boxes here, but just to kind of highlight again what I was talking about earlier, you can see the extent of precipitation across the Southwest and all these individual plots. Those active periods, July 23rd through July 26th, widespread precipitation amounts above an inch were occurring across Arizona and New Mexico. And then we had that break period from August 6th through August 9th. And then we moved back into that another active period that really kind of was more confined to southern Arizona and then into New Mexico, and then had quite a big event across both Arizona and New Mexico on August 14th. We look at the accumulation of precipitation at Tucson International Airport, and this has got us to our record level conditions in July. So record wet conditions here in Tucson were numerous days above an inch, and really back-to-back rainfall days that pushed us well above average through August, and to record conditions. We're contending for the record wettest monsoon through the end of September. We'll have to see how that plays out. We're not quite to that level yet, but we already have almost 12 inches of precip here in Tucson. This has led to some really interesting, kind of unusual things with all of this precipitation occurring in the Southwest. Looked at the Roosevelt Lake Reservoir on the Salt River Project. Actually has had some rise in its elevation across the reservoir. And so that upper plot there shows that we were coming out of June and into July and into those couple of wet periods, really started to see levels rise in that reservoir, which I think is quite unusual for the summertime. This is, the bottom plot is looking at June 1st, 2020. So you can see that it just fell all the way through last summer and then fell through last winter, kind of leveled out during the winter time and then fell again. And we're now just sort of inching back up. I don't think this is going to be a big filler, but it's really unusual to see this kind of rise in stream flows in the summertime. And I also recognize I've been talking a lot about Tucson. We know that other parts of the region have had decent monsoons. This is from Albuquerque. And Albuquerque had a pretty good active period through July, but it's kind of kept pace and is now lagging behind. And so you see this across far northeast Arizona and northern parts of New Mexico has really slowed down and now falling a little bit behind. So we'll have to see this monsoon activity pick up in earnest for the next couple of weeks, really to push everybody together to above average conditions. So what have we seen? This is looking at the upper level wind flow patterns, the average conditions between July 15th and August 15th. So they're kind of bracketing those two wet periods. We've seen is a really nicely placed upper level ridge. So our Four Corners high has been in the Four Corners region. And so it's kind of been in its perfect location and a little bit north of us. Unfortunately, that's led to very, very hot, record hot conditions across Northern California, Pacific Northwest, but we have benefited because that position of that has allowed subtropical moisture to flow in south of it, both with nice easterly flow and then enhancing Gulf surge events at the surface up the Gulf of California. And we see this in precipitable water, which is going to be that measurement of the amount of moisture in the whole column of the atmosphere above a location. So it's not only going to be at the surface, but up through. And that gives us a good indication if we've got high precipitable water. It's the real important fuel to fuel thunderstorms. And so you can look down this lower right, which is how unusual is this with respect to the historical period of record. Those red conditions show very unusually high amounts of precipitable water. And you can see how they're really centered at the northern Gulf of California and they're kind of extended up into Arizona, reaching over into New Mexico as well. So this has been good subtropical ridge position and has really kept us in really solid moisture for many weeks now. And looking more broadly across in the Southwest, the West, and then down into Mexico, the upper left is the observed precip from the middle of July through the middle of August. The bottom left is the climatology, what we'd expect to see. And then now we can see how unusual is that with respect to these this climatology is the upper right. So you can see Arizona really does stand out as seeing the most unusual amounts of precipitation so far this monsoon season, a little bit in southern New Mexico. And then if we look at the percent of average, it does reach down into Mexico, but Mexico seeing kind of more average conditions where parts of the Four Corners states have seen the really enhanced monsoon activity. And then finally, I'm just going to wrap up here with a couple of slides here just to show you just the amazing reversal that we've seen. So this doesn't even include last summer, but it's through October 1st of 2020, our water year, which will end on September 30th. So just a couple of weeks away here. Coming into this water year in October 2020, we were staring at down a La Nina event. Didn't expect a lot of precipitation, and we really didn't get any down here in Tucson. And so the idea of actually getting above average or even average water year precipitation was pretty far-fetched, but we've done it, and we're quite a bit ahead of schedule now as far as the amount of precipitation we normally see in a water year, just because of these enhanced activity of the monsoon last couple of weeks. And then just to show you finally the reversal in these drought conditions, this is the standardized precipitation index shown for all timescales from the 1 month to the 60 months. So the 1 month is just the variability on a 1 month time scale. 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, we can extend that window backwards to look at the slower moving elements of climate here. And I wanted to show you that the band at the far right is the July 2021. 1 month is at the very bottom, and then it's got all those other timescales. So what it shows here is that we have both really wet conditions at the short term, but we also have longer term drought still hanging out there because we have these longer term deficits that we cannot solve with just 1 or 2 or even 3 months of precipitation. So we really, to reverse some of these longer term drought trends, we're going to need to see a good winter next winter and a good next summer. Those are really hard to come by, and unfortunately we're looking at another La Nina event. So I think we need to enjoy these short term drought condition improvements, but we have a longer term drought that we're still going to be contending with probably for some time. But just to kind of end on a positive note, this is the week 3-4 outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, which is September 4th through the 17th. And it has pretty consistently been looking out a couple of weeks, suggesting that we're going to move back into some enhanced monsoon activity, probably some more assists from the East Pacific tropical storms that are forming there that'll come closer to the Gulf of California, the mouth of Gulf of California, which will then help sort of that moisture flow back up into Arizona and put us back into that moisture that will be necessary for thunderstorm development. So thanks so much, and I'll stop and I'll hand this over to Ben.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just Mike did a nice job of giving the overview of where we're at. And I just wanted to give a quick overview of a few things we do with CLIMAS, a few of the tools we use to track monsoon, and then a little bit about a research project we've been working on, not much in terms of details, but just kind of a taste. So let's see, advance my slide. So Mike already showed you this. This is just the region-wide map, at least for most of the Southwest. You get a little taste of Nevada, Colorado, and Utah there on the top, kind of where things stand with the monsoon. But one of the things we do on a kind of monthly basis or an annual basis is to take a look at where the monsoon regional totals also stand. You know, this really highlights where we sit in terms of kind of where we stand in the region and how it compares to kind of the long-term climatology, but also recent years. So Mike mentioned 2020 was kind of the failed monsoon all around the region. And those little blue bars show just how low those 2020 totals were. So keeping track of kind of where things stand as far as 2021 to date with the orange, you see quite a few stations are pulling well ahead of normal. And also just kind of where things stand. And really lets us see kind of how it sits in context, but it doesn't say how the rain fell. You know, is it a gradual series of storms? Was it one big event? Was it an early onset? Was it kind of a late, you know, last minute buzzer beater? And so another way we tend to pull together some of these data is to look at the accumulation plots and kind of where things stand through regional tracking. And so, you know, looking at Flagstaff, Phoenix, and Tucson here, you can see Flagstaff had kind of that nice early run of activity, a pulse in the middle, and a few recent events, and very similar for Phoenix and Tucson. I'll note that I had to keep changing the scale for the Tucson plot. Normally we don't go up to 10 or 12 inches there on the right for the accumulation plot, but it keeps surprising us. But you can see all three of those stations have a series of kind of regular events throughout the course of the core monsoon period that has led to much above normal totals. If we shift to the east a little bit, we see Albuquerque. Mike mentioned that they've kind of lagged behind a little bit. They're pretty close to normal totals as far as season to date, but you see it was really some early season activity in one event kind of there at the end of July that kind of kept them in the running. Whereas El Paso demonstrates what an early start can really look like. It really pushed ahead early, had some of that mid-July activity, and then a few recent events that have kept El Paso pushed well above average. So again, it just kind of gives a sense of the flavor of the monsoon. So what's the character? You know, how do we see these accumulations taking place, and what does that mean as far as water resource storage or how it impacts the landscape. And so that was just a little quick taste of a few things. For more information, we have a monthly climate outlook, so that conveys some of this information. Certainly during the monsoon, we talk a lot about the monsoon. I'd like to thank you for the plug for the podcast. I also was going to plug the podcast. During the normal times, we have them about once a month. In the monsoon, we tend to do them every 2 or 3 weeks sometimes, because there's just so much to talk about as far as what's going on with the monsoon. And I'd also point you to the National Weather Service tracking page and also Mike's Climate Science Applications Program. So now I just want to give just a little taste of why we think about some of this monsoon variability. The monsoon stretches across a pretty long season, June 15th to September 30th. And a lot can happen in a single day, much less a whole season. But these monsoon storms can be highly variable over these short distances, which really makes them difficult to measure and track. And this video I've run in the background is just an example from early July, where a storm built on the Catalina Mountains and then finally just opened up the skies and just dumped an inordinate amount of water on the foothills. But where this camera was shooting actually wasn't recording any precipitation at the time. And so it really gets us thinking about where and when these monsoon events take place, and what does that mean for water storage, or the impacts on the landscape, or the ways we track precipitation and over time. And so one thing we've been doing is aggregating a bunch of data from various sources. And one of the reasons is it allows us to look at some of the variability at these smaller, local to regional scales. And really asking the question of how well do these dense networks help us understand the spatial patterns of some of the daily and event totals, and also take another look at the seasonal tracking and kind of to start thinking about what some of these regional comparisons might look like. And so the map on the left is an event that passed through in July, one of the only rain events in July actually, in Tucson, and it just shows how a storm moved across the sort of central and foothills region of Tucson, but really the northern part of town and much of South Tucson was left out from the storm. And I circled the airport just to highlight that while there was 2, 3, and even 4 inches in some of these central stations, which is a mix of rain log and flood control district stations, the Tucson airport only recorded 0.15 inches. So it really shows a disparity, and that's only a few miles from that storm track. Then the map on the right is a much lighter event where the airport recorded 0 inches, but there was a small storm on the west side of town in the mountains and kind of on the edge of some of the populated area. And so it just shows that these denser networks are, give us a chance to pick up some of these storm events and the variability that's much harder to see at these larger scales. If we zoom out a little bit, here's a 4-day event total that just shows, 3, 4, 5 inches across the Tucson Basin, where the Tucson airport was kind of in the middle of that distribution with 4 inches. And then if we zoom out a little bit further, the map on the left is kind of our last big monsoon that we were excited about in the southern Arizona region, which is 2017. And it shows that, the Tucson airport got about 8.5 inches, which was really on the wet end of the distribution of the stations around Pima County, which is, demonstrated by the size of the dots. The right map is the same area, but for 2021 to date, shows the Tucson airport's close to 12 inches, which is, still on the wet end of that distribution, but it really just shows, and much like southern Arizona and parts of New Mexico, a really egalitarian monsoon, at least for the areas that are getting this much precip. So there's not so much the winners and losers that we sometimes see at a regional scale, where one station might get 2 inches and another station gets 8 inches. This has really been storms that have filled in lots of the spaces, and that's a really interesting difference compared to, say, 2017, which was kind of our last big monsoon. So what does that mean as far as the record? Well, Tucson's really the only station that's flirting with the idea of hitting that record. We see Flagstaff, Phoenix, and Albuquerque and El Paso are all running well above normal, but really not necessarily in shouting distance of that record total. And then Albuquerque, as Mike mentioned and we've highlighted, really needs a boost in order to get back up to that. And so, looking at the percent of average precipitation, we see that, for this monsoon distribution, it really depends on the time frame you're looking at and also the location. Southern Arizona and parts of New Mexico certainly are seeing some really impressive totals, but there's other areas around the region that are closer to normal or even a little bit behind. Mike chose the more optimistic outlook, which was that 2-week outlook that shows some wet conditions. I grabbed the 1-month September outlook, and it really highlights, for the record, it's going to depend on September and what we see for this last kind of 4 or 5 weeks of the monsoon. And then also, as Mike hinted at, what we might see for long-term drought recovery is also going to hinge a lot about what kind of precip we see both this monsoon, but also into the winter season, And that'll depend a lot on what those impacts for the La Nina that is likely to emerge will have on those precipitation totals. And so with that, I'll turn it over to questions for the group.
Great, thank you, Ben, and thanks, Mike. Thanks for your great presentations and good news for a region that's been having some pretty severe drought for a long time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joel Lisenby with the National Integrated Drought Information System to help moderate the questions. Joel, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I just turned on my microphone and camera. So thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mike. We've got just a couple of questions. We don't have a whole lot of time for questions either, so I think it'll work out pretty well. Mike, at the very end of your talk, you mentioned the short-term drought versus the long-term drought, and that a few months of monsoon isn't going to help that much. I wonder what you can say a little more about the long-term drought. There's been a lot of news about water restrictions coming out of Lake Mead, but there are other water storages around Arizona and the Southwest. How are they faring right now?
Yeah, you know, Ben might even have a better answer because of the Southwest Climate Outlook has some nice graphics in there on some of the storage of the Arizona, New Mexico reservoirs. Ben, I don't know if you have that handy. The one plot that I showed you about Salt River Project Reservoir, the Roosevelt, had been in good shape 2 seasons ago because of good winter precipitation, but has really slid because of last winter, and is now filling a little bit, but we don't typically get a lot of filling that happens during the summertime. So this is really unusual and probably not a real big reversal. But Ben, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think I was trying to pull up the plot of the reservoirs. I think generally speaking, we're seeing the accumulated deficits in that precipitation, even though we've had pretty good precip. Most of the reservoirs are still at or below their long-term average, and so and you know, some of them, you know, on the Rio Grande Basin, they're really quite well below average. And so I think it's going to take more than just I guess the reservoirs are a demonstration of the impact of that long-term deficit that Mike mentioned. So
thanks. Finally, you both sort of touched on this, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about it. Oh, I've just had a question come in, so thank you, Jennifer. The question is, do you have comparison data for Durango 2020 data versus 2021 data? Do you have any idea? Oh, versus normal, adds that too. How's Durango, Southwest Colorado doing?
We could not off the top of my head. We could certainly pull it together, but I don't have it at the ready.
That's okay. Another question is, what can you say about the return interval of a monsoon like this?
That's a really good question. The July precipitation total was record, and so I'm just talking for Tucson, record July. So that would have been in the 120-year record. So we're seeing something that we haven't seen in the instrumental record. I don't know as far as longer term return intervals, but my guess is we're seeing sort of really rare precipitation events. And even the 1 and 3 and 5 day totals that we've seen across parts of the Southwest have been pretty rare events, probably 1 in 50, if not 1 in 100 year events.
Yeah, Zach on the podcast has been calling this the generational monsoon, which seems appropriate. It's, this might be the one, at least for Southern Arizona. There's other places that would think this isn't really what I'd consider generational, but yeah, for Southern Arizona, it does feel like this is probably the time we'll see this. So.
Right, and we recognize that it's not happening across all of the Southwest. We're trying to articulate that it has been. It's interesting when Tucson and Phoenix get a lot of precipitation, it tends to take over all of the narratives, and so we're trying to make sure that there are other locations that have had either average or even are kind of lagging a little bit behind.
Great. I know that you're probably talking and not thinking about Durango, but do you have anything on Durango yet?
I have real trouble chewing gum and walking at the same time. So this.
If that's a thing, we might take that offline. And sorry,
yeah,
we can help.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, thanks for the question. We'll get back to you. I think that's it for questions. Thanks to both of you, and I'll pass back to Emily to wrap this up.
All right, I just want to say thank you again to Mike Crimmins and Ben McMahon for their great briefing. I do want to plug that podcast again. It's really fun. It's fun to listen to, and thank you for the good news this time. The Drought Learning Network links climate service providers with resource managers, and this is an effort from the Drought Monitoring and Reporting team of the Southwest Drought Learning Network. So we're going to continue with these 30-minute briefings as long as there are areas of extreme and exceptional drought in the southwestern United States. Thanks, everyone. This concludes our webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.